Hi, everybody. Welcome. And today we'll be diving into the world of transfer data and animal welfare. Specifically, we'll be exploring how to define, track, analyze the exchange of animals between agencies, so what we call transfers. And while it might seem like a simple concept, something that we're all familiar with, there's more nuance to it, I think, than meets the eye. And our goal today is not only to clarify on some of the definitions involved in transfers, but also to potentially convince you to think differently about how you use and interpret transfer data. And so for those of you who are not familiar, I'm Michelle Brodbeck, Data Education Coordinator for Shelter Animals Count.
And my name is Jessica Nelson. I am our Senior Manager of Software Support for 24Pet, and we manage PetPoint. So I think most of you are PetPoint users today. So we'll talk through some best practices and things for that as well.
Yes, I think everybody here in the audience is probably a PetPoint and SAC user. But if you're not registered with SAC and you're interested in doing that, we'll have contact information at the end, so feel free. But I think everybody is probably both. So we have a lot to talk about today, so I wanted to first discuss the importance of standardizing language in animal welfare and how it plays a key role in improving communication and operations between organizations. And next, we'll look at some high-level trends in transfer programs, and then we'll dive into how transfer program data is currently being collected and explore maybe some alternative data opportunities for these types of programs. And finally, in the second part of the session, we'll cover general best practices for transfer data, program data entry, followed by some software-specific ones for PetPoint that Jessica will go over. And so just to jump in, animal welfare, as we all know and feel, is a collaborative field. And the key to any successful collaboration is, of course, communication. We see the consequences of not communicating in the plot of any TV drama, the one with the misunderstanding where everyone is confused and upset. Each of our organizations has its own mission and objectives, but it's important that we all agree on the meanings of the words that we use and how they translate into our practices every day. A good example of this is demonstrated here by this particular episode of Friends, which I think everyone on the planet has seen. And I'm still not convinced that anybody can agree on the definition of what a break is. But that's a topic for another webinar. And to help animal welfare professionals speak the same language and effectively communicate, Shelter Animals Count, in collaboration with Haas, created the Animal Welfare Glossary. If you've ever wondered what an acronym means or how a calculation is done, the Animal Welfare Glossary can help clarify that. The glossary is found on our website, and it compiles frequently used terms and metrics and provides definitions and use cases. The glossary is a live document or live entity, I guess, that will continue to add to and update as the industry progresses, because of course not everything stays the same. And if you're reviewing it, if there's ever anything that you think is missing or should be changed, feel free to share that feedback with us. We're always happy to hear from you. And to bring some clarity to these data definitions that we've kind of had on the website for a long time, and how they may show up in our everyday work, we've kicked off our Data Foundation series. These blogs are written by Kristen Hassan and supported by Hills. So thank you for both for this important project. But this series is really helpful for, I think, newcomers and seasoned pros, because let's face this, we all make mix-ups every once in a while. I know that there's certainly been times where I've been singing my favorite song for years and years and years, and I've gotten the lyrics completely wrong. So it happens to the best of us, and it's always good to keep a refresher, even on the basics. And so now that we recognize the importance of standardizing definitions, let's review some key terms that will be related to transfers and referenced throughout the rest of our conversation. So first and foremost, let's define what we mean by transfers. It's the exchange of animals between agencies, whether it's an intake or an outcome. While this might seem straightforward, it's worth noting that our data shows that there's not complete agreement on this definition. And some key points to remember, I think, would be transfers occur between animal welfare organizations or between animal welfare orgs and non-animal welfare entities, like a government department or something like that. But transfers don't occur between animal welfare orgs and individual people. Obviously, there might be individuals associated with those organizations, dealing with those transfers, but they are attached to a greater entity. So I think that's a really important distinction. So next, we can discuss community intake. If you're familiar with our shelter animals count reports, we reference community intake all the time, and we define it as the total number of intakes from community sources, which includes all live intakes except for transfers. And community intake types would include stray at large, relinquished by owner, other intakes like born in care, etc. And you might also hear us refer to community intake types by more broadly as an animal's original source. This is the term that's used in PetPoint, so we might jump between those two terms throughout the conversation. And next, we're going to look at organizations' relationship statuses, which is everyone's favorite conversation, and concerning transfer interactions, right? And so each transferred animal involves at least one originating organization and one receiving organization. Typically, in the past, I think we've referred to it as an originating shelter or a receiving shelter. But of course, more than just shelters are involved in that interaction. So I want to make it more of a broad definition of organization, which includes both. And of course, originating organizations would be shelters, rescues, etc., where the animal initially resides. It's typically where the first community intake would occur. And receiving organizations would be, again, shelters, rescues, etc., that accepts the animal from the originating organization. And again, they have at least one in each interaction, or both in each interaction, but animals might, go between a couple of different organizations as well over their sort of whole trip through the animal welfare system. And in addition to originating and receiving organizations, each involved in the transfer can have some additional details related to that relationship. And we can take a look at these different types of relationships from least to most formal, starting all the way on the left with non-partners. So these are organizations that don't necessarily have an established relationship and may only engage informally or rarely. And then we have partners who are approved for transfers between each other's organizations. These transfers occur as needed or on a case-by-case basis without a formal commitment to broader collaboration. So they can still be transferring on a regular basis, but there's no real formal commitment. And then next we have coalition members. They're part of a more formal working network working towards a shared goal, like reducing shelter intake. And this might involve combined strategic planning, or even data sharing to benefit their greater community. And finally, the most formal being contracted organizations. These organizations would have legally binding agreements to provide specific services like animal care or transport, and they would have a clearly defined legal structure again. And each of these relationship types is unique and can help organizations sort of set expectations for collaboration. And then next, we'll talk through the current state of transfer programs and some broad trends that we are seeing with national data. The transfer system, as we are all pretty familiar, has struggled to rebound since the pandemic, and the number of animals being transferred among organizations continues to decrease even in 2024, at least for the first half of 2024. We've identified that while intakes are lower in general than last year, animals are staying longer, leading to rising populations in organizations' care. And this has created really a backup of animals is significantly impacting transfer programs. However, it's important to mention that we still don't really have a clear idea of why animals that are being transferred, or how many of them are mandated by government ordinances or contracts, and how many are moving voluntarily via transfer programs. In the first half of 2024, 726,000 dogs and cats were transferred to animal welfare organizations or into animal welfare organizations. And this is an approximately 8% decrease compared to the first half of 2023. And this translates to roughly 61,000 fewer dogs and cats being transferred in. And then a similar trend for transfer out. There was a decrease of 12% compared to the first half of 2023 in 2024, which translates to about 63,000 fewer dogs and cats. Something important to keep in mind, you might be thinking, why are these two different? Transfers in do also come from non-animal welfare sources. And so that does cause the difference in trends sometimes, because typically we have more transfers in than transfers out, because again, we do have additional sources of animals coming in from that way. And so this is, if you attended the Dogs and Data seminar about transfer challenges, you might be familiar with some of these graphics and some of this data. But I just thought they were important to give context to our conversation, which first we have our graphic here. Since 2019, the number of cats being transferred to shelters has gone up by 16%, while conversely, dog transfers have fallen by 14%, which I think is pretty staggering. And graphic two, among all the organizations with complete data reported at SAC for 2019 through 2023, 8 of the top 10 shelters that accepted the most transfers have decreased the number of animals they accept. And then finally, dogs that are transferred now stay longer in shelters than other dog intake types like owner surrenders and stray, with length of stay increasing from 9 to 13 days in 2023, which is, I think, a pretty big jump. And now that we've established a sort of understanding of transfer programs and trends and how their volume has shifted, we can dive deeper into the current state of transfer data collected beyond just intake and outcome types. Specifically, I'd like to focus on the types of subtypes we're currently tracking. So below, we have a short list of the top 10 transfers for PetPoint organizations in 2023. Overall, I'd like everyone to just kind of think about for a moment, what kind of insights do you think you could extract from this data that you're looking at here? And feel free to throw them into the chat, because I'm curious as to what everybody thinks. This data was pulled from organizations that are opted into our PetPoint SAC API, and also obviously had transfer data. The sample includes more than 300 orgs and more than 200,000 records. So it doesn't include every single PetPoint organization, but in general, I think it's a pretty representative sample of the whole population. And so we can see for both transfers in and out that the top 2 most popular subtypes are coalition partner and non-coalition partner, which are 2 subtypes that I believe Jessica can confirm for me come preloaded with your PetPoint software. And so we have a few other, generic subtypes kind of listed here. So general, outside coalition, which is just another way of saying non-coalition, I think. And only rescue for room is a subtype that captures why that animal was transferred for space, which I suspect, and I think everybody can probably agree, that we think that transfers due to space probably account for a much higher % of transfers. It's just not really on the paper here. And as we can see, these few subtypes make up more than 50% of the records in our sample, which is the majority of records. And so now, just a moment ago, I had asked you guys to consider what insights you might be able to draw from this data. And I'll admit I was being a little bit facetious. While there might be some very creative analysts out there and very creative ways to analyze it, the insights that we could realistically gain from this type of information, I think, are pretty limited. And looking at the entire sample, we found that over 80% of transfers have no recorded reason. It doesn't mean they have no recorded data. There is subtype information in there, but it just means that the why isn't there, which means our ability to analyze these cases is still pretty limited in terms of transfers. But I'm an optimist, and I prefer to see this as a untapped opportunity for gaining deeper insights into transfer programs in general. And if you're curious about the types of subtypes that are in that 81%, that green box to the right there includes the themes that you'll see in this 81%. And I understand that each of these data types, they may add real value to your individual organizations and the analysis that you do. And I don't disagree. I totally think that this information is still very important. I mean, we're not suggesting that we stop collecting this information. Rather, we want to kind of move it out of the subtype field and into another area of the software so that we can have everything. And so now, hopefully, we can explore a better alternative use for the subtype field. Transfer programs, again, are in a tough spot, and the number of animals that are moving through these programs has really dropped over the years. And something that used to provide so many live outcomes is becoming harder and harder for us to rely on. And a lot of issues are beyond our control in the industry, but one area we can certainly make a difference in is data collection. That is certainly within our control. And if we start looking at why animals are being transferred rather than just who is being transferred or where to, we might find some real solutions there, or at the very least, we get a better handle on what's going on. So with that in mind, with input from our animal level data focus groups, if any of you are in this call, that's great. And our committee members, we drafted a standardized list of transfer subtypes that capture the reasons why, that hopefully would capture the reasons why animals are being transferred. So that list would include resource availability, emergency response, legal obligation, non-animal welfare entity, and transfer returns. And I won't go through each of the full definitions of all of these, but I'll quickly run through some common scenarios that would fall into each category so you can get a better idea of what we're trying to capture. So first we have resource availability, and that would include things like transfers due to space, organizational capacity, so that's related to staff members or other financial capacity that the organization may or may not have, established programs, medical needs, behavioral needs, species or breed specialization. And then emergency response, which is pretty topical, I think, due to recent events with our hurricanes recently that we both had, or that we had in the southern United States, which would include natural disasters, catastrophic events, or seizure support. And then we have legal obligation, which would include government contracts, originating organization, and that would be transfers due to things like you take in an animal, it's microchipped to another organization, they want that animal back, you would transfer that animal back to them or to them in the first place, as they are the originating organization. And then finally, just ordinances related to laws in your community that might require you to transfer. And then now we have non-animal welfare entity, and this is not necessarily a reason why something is being transferred. This is more of a how, but ultimately, I think we do have animals entering the animal welfare system coming from these non-animal welfare sources. Like, they might come from police departments or other working programs within the government. They could be retired working animals, laboratory animals, or retired breeding facility animals. And I think it's good for us to measure how many animals are coming in from these sources, because there are organizations certainly that are taking in animals from these places. And so you'll notice also there is an asterisk under retired laboratory and retired breeding facility animals, as we would likely only be using that as a transfer in subtype. To my knowledge, fortunately, there's not any transfers out going to these types of places. And finally, we have transfer returns, which is pretty easy to understand. These are where animals would be transferred back to an originating organization after being previously transferred, typically due to some kind of failed placement or adoption return.
And a quick plug for how to track some of this stuff in PetPoint. So as Michelle mentioned, there are some subtypes for transfers in and out that are preloaded into your software when you start up. They are something that's editable. So you can go, your admin on your account can go into the admin options space within your PetPoint database, look at add edit field value, and then select operations subtype, and then the transfer group. And then you can add in additional subtypes that make sense for you. So I think all of the subtypes that Michelle has talked about would be great to add in here. And we'll talk a little bit more about additional data collection around those in a little bit.
Thanks, Jessica. And we understand that you may not want to change your data collection habits because, again, each of these types provide real value to your organizations. Tracking logistics ensures accurate and easily accessible reporting for your organizations to the public, grantors, SAC, etc. Identifying coalitions versus non-coalition transfers allow us to measure true impact of collaborative efforts, and understanding community intake sources is crucial for tailoring intake prevention strategies and meeting specific needs of your community. But that being said, I think it's crucial for us to evolve as an industry and move away from just basic data collection related to transfers. And if we look at owner surrender reasons and subtypes, for example, we see that the focus has always been on understanding why animals are surrendered. And that data helps us figure out how to prevent those situations and develop supportive programs. And this shift in our data collection approach can also enhance other areas of animal welfare programming, such as emergency response or disaster preparedness, by ensuring that we have the right information to act quickly and effectively. And there's so many other areas I think that we could expand into as well. I think really the possibilities are endless. And as I promised earlier, you really won't have to choose between one or the other. You won't have to choose between collecting new and getting rid of old practices. In the second half of our presentation, which we'll move to now, we'll show you how to easily gather and report on this data using your software. But first, we're going to talk through some general data entry best practices, and then we'll move to the software PetPoint specific ones. And so let's talk about how to ace your data entry, focusing on 3 key areas being accuracy, consistency, and efficiency. First, accuracy through the order of operations, just like PEMDAS and math. And I hope that mentioning PEMDAS or order of operations isn't too traumatic for people. I promise I will not make you do math, but I think that the concept is really applicable to what we're talking about. And it provides a clear sequence in your data entry and ensures precision and hopefully unlocking valuable insights. And next being consistency, which hopefully will lead to uniform data entry and reliable reporting, analysis, making every entry count. And finally, efficiency through automation in your software and otherwise, saving time and reducing errors, allowing your team to focus on more strategic tasks. In the next few slides, we'll go over practical examples of how to achieve success in these areas so you can hopefully implement them. And so again, I would hope in a presentation about data, I would not be the only person who did not hate math in school, but if I did, I do apologize. And I promise I won't make anyone actually solve a math problem. This equation is for display purposes only. But I think order of operations is a really important concept that we should all keep in mind when we're entering data for animals in our care. If we follow the steps outlined in the acronym, which I won't go through all of them, then we arrive hopefully at the right conclusion or we get the right answer, right? And then if we do things out of order, then we end up with the wrong answer or perhaps a mistaken conclusion. And so let's try to apply this concept to an animal welfare example. So say we have a dog that enters organization A as a stray and then is transferred to organization B. If organization A processes the dog as a stray and organization B processes the dog as a transfer, then voila, we have, when we look at the data, the aggregated data, we have 1 stray and 1 transfer. But if organization A and B both process the dog as a stray because organization B really wants to capture that community intake type, then we have 2 strays and 0 transfers, and the dog has been really kind of double counted in the stray category. And while a handful of double counted animals really won't impact national trends, if we scale up this practice to larger and larger groups of animals, we have a lot more dogs. We might begin to be drawing incorrect conclusions from our data. And so for some context, in 2023, SAC estimated that the animal welfare system took in 3.8 million strays and another 1.5 million transfers. So that's a lot of animals that hopefully we all are following that order of operations. But if it's all mixed up, then we may not have a good idea of how our intake is distributed. And so how do we implement order of operations in our everyday life? We use SOPs. And SOPs may not be the most exciting thing for everybody, but they are really, really important. And they're really like a guidebook for data entry. And so by following a clear step-by-step sequence, your team can avoid making mistakes and make sure that data is entered consistently. Just like PEMDAS helps ensure accuracy in math, SOPs help streamline your data process, ensuring everything is done in the right order. And so now moving to the C in our ACE acronym, consistency. To achieve consistency in data entry, SOPs are invaluable, but definitely play an equally critical role by providing clear definitions and for the terms that we use in the categories. We can help eliminate confusion and make it easier for staff to understand exactly what is expected. in each scenario that they're presented with. And SOPs work best when paired with these helpful tools like detailed keys, a support document for standard transfer subtypes, for example, in the image there, can help guide staff in assigning each type correctly, and again, streamlining that process and eliminating the second guessing.
Leading into efficiency a little bit, if you were not already aware, we do have an API that will automatically upload your data to SAC and the kind of the data collection that they have. So we have that available from PetPoint automatically. It goes once a month. So no more pulling reports and manually updating it. We do have on the screen there a QR code to get you instructions on how to do that if you don't already have that enabled. And on the next slide here, something very important. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. I wanted to add one thing here, which is before I had mentioned in terms of collecting, I guess, in-state and out-of-state transfer information, that information is important for reporting to SAC. If you're opted into the API, it's built to automatically sort that based on your location as connected to the transferring organization. It knows how to sort all those things, so you don't need to use the subtype to capture it. The API does it for you. Sorry.
Continue. Thank you. No, thanks so much. And a question we get a lot around this API is with mapping. So this is the step in setting that up and enabling it that organizations often get stuck on. The article with the QR code has some information on it, and we'll show you at the end of the presentation too how to submit a support case. So if you have trouble, you can reach out to us and we can help. But again, this is a task that your admin can do under admin options, and then you can see the selections there on the screen to map your data so it goes into the right buckets.
Awesome. And now we're going to move to PetPoint data entry best practices.
Thank you. Just a couple of high-level things I have to mention as we're talking about best practices with PetPoint. Reinforcing what Michelle had said, it is agency to agency. So when you are completing a transfer, whether it's in or out in PetPoint, it's not going to let you select an individual. You have to select an agency. So that helps to reinforce that overall best practice. If you're not already using mobile checkout, this is another great opportunity to build in some efficiency for you and your team. Another QR code there on the screen if you want to learn a bit more about it. But with mobile checkout, I think it's particularly helpful around transfers because often the people who are organizing or are signers on behalf of those organizations may not actually be transporting the animals. So it's really helpful to be able to do mobile checkout. You can send a link via email or text message. The other person on the other end can sign that and send those documents back through mobile checkout. That then will save all of the documents and that contract in your PetPoint database automatically. So can get rid of your file cabinet if you want to and just keep it all in your database that way. PetPoint to PetPoint transfer is another great way to build in some efficiency. There's a little bit of extra setup when you're creating the agencies. Again, another QR code in case that's helpful. But this way, when you perform a transfer in PetPoint, it will move the animal from one database to the other. So you won't have to create the animal. You won't have to enter all that basic information. Again, it will actually move that data for you. So can lighten the load for your team a little bit. And then we talked a little bit about that community intake type. So this is using original source is a great way to track that. And I'll show you in the next couple of slides where we track that information. So as we mentioned before, the WHO data is already captured in PetPoint. So using a subtype to capture who that organization is, whether it's a coalition partner, a non-coalition partner, is a little bit redundant. So here we've got a transfer out and a transfer in screen here. And you can see on both it has the agency. So that is going to collect the WHO data. And then we have all these other things where you can collect the why information. Something really important to note is that the subtype is what is sent through the API and provided to SAC. So the reason, the original source, those things are not going to be sent through the API. But if that information is still important for you to have for your own purposes and data analytics, this is a great way to capture some of that. So there's several different opportunities to get all that different levels of data in there. When we look at the relationship status or relationship type between organizations, we've got a great way to track that in PetPoint as well. So you could use some of those other fields like transfer reason, but we have a type, agency type field, which is really designed to capture that information. So you can see on this screen here, some of them are highlighted. That's again, customizable by your admin. So you can select what those type choices would be for your team. But this is a great way to analyze the types of organizations you're interacting with, those types of agencies, and kind of see the impact there. And we've got a really cool report. I'm a reports nerd, so I'm going to take a couple minutes to talk to you guys about some of my favorites. This agency activity report, you can look at all of the agencies that you're interacting with for transfers and see the animals that are moving in and out of those relationships. So you can look at it from the type of organization. You can look at, on this report, you can see it has the operation subtype as well. So if you want to capture that information of why on transfer subtype, this is a great way to kind of get that in a snapshot. You can also pull the transfer reason on this. So when we're looking at those different levels of data, if you have resource availability as your subtype, you can then use transfer reason to get a little bit deeper. On the slide where Michelle broke down what some of those kind of sub reasons could be for that, whether that's medical or behavior or space, this is a spot where you can track that under the transfer reason. And that all pulls on this agency activity report based on the agencies. Another of my favorite reports for looking at data is this animal transfer in with results. So you can see on this report that this has all of the data broken out by agency again. And what's really cool about this one is that you can then see the results of those transfers. So if you are looking at the animals who came from the city of Marion on this list, you can see that one was adopted and one is still within your care. So there's another great way to look by agency and see your impact on your population. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is all of these report examples are pulled from a demo database. So it's all fake data. None of it, it's all made up, just like points on whose line, right? Tracking why with subtypes makes some kind of at a glance snapshot reporting really, really simple. Our crosstab reports were some of my favorite when I was tracking data for a shelter. And if you have your subtypes tracking why animals are coming to or leaving via transfer, you can pull these crosstab reports for month over month comparison, year over year, and you can get a really quick summary of why animals are coming and going in those ways. If you're looking at some grant funding opportunities or looking for opportunities for increased programming or trying to find some bottlenecks, these crosstab reports can be really helpful to get you a snapshot of the volume that's moving in different spaces. Mentioned about the original source, and that would track your community intake from an animal being transferred in. So wanted to just show what that looks like on an intake field there. So you can see that related to an animal specifically. So another way that we can get even deeper into a level of data collection for transfers is around our reference number field or our pet ID option within PetPoint. So say you are using the operation subtype of disaster response for a transfer in, and you want to track whether or not that animal was related to a specific event, maybe a wildfire or a hurricane, and you want to look at the volume of animals or be able to analyze the animals that are coming from that specific event. You could then apply for some funding opportunities or look at what type of staffing you're going to need to think about in the future related to these specific events. So there's a couple of different ways that we can track that in PetPoint, as I mentioned. The reference number field is great. It's a free text field, so you can put in whatever works for your organization. It shows on the info center grid, so your home screen when you log into PetPoint, that is one of the columns that's there. So you can sort by it and filter your active animals list by that reference number. It does show on a lot of our detail reports too. So again, you can do a lot of analytics around that field. Using the pet ID is another great way to flag an animal to a specific event. This is something that type is going to be set by your admin. So they'll have to go in and set the specific pet ID type, but then the ID itself is another free text field. This pet ID does also come with an expiration date. So if you want to track anything related to those expiration dates, you can do that this way as well. A couple of great reports for tracking the Y subtypes and all those other levels of data that you can track on your PetPoint transfers in and out are our animal intake extended report and animal outcome by intake extended report. So those reports include your agency information, so the who associated with those transfers. It includes the subtypes, it includes the transfer reason, it includes the original source where appropriate, and it includes the reference number. So if you want to look at all of that data and really get in deep, these are great reports to look at. They export automatically into Excel, so you can do all sorts of manipulation to it as well.
Thank you. And then we just want to go over a summary of some resources that we talked about over the last 30 minutes or so, just to make sure that you knew where to go if you had more questions or problems.
Yeah, from any PetPoint screen, if you need to reach out to my team, the support team, you can hover over support and click contact us. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit
in the wrong direction. I'm apologize.
That's okay. And community, if you're not familiar, is our online resource library. So the QR codes that are earlier in the presentation, and we'll show them again in a minute, they all link to our community articles, but it is a vast resource. So you can search there and find anything, articles related to anything within PetPoint. But then reach out to my team if you have questions or need more information about how to. You can always submit a support case.
And again, this is just any QR codes that we had throughout the presentation. If you missed them before, you can just grab them again here now. I just want to move to one more slide, and then I'll go back to that for anybody who wants it. And we covered a lot of recommendations today, but don't worry, you don't need to memorize everything that we said. You'll have access to a recording, and SAC will also be releasing a data entry best practices guide very soon. This guide will include SOPs and recommended standard values like some of the ones that we talked about today, and not just for transfer subtypes. So your organizations can implement them when they're ready. And so if anybody has any questions or needs some help or troubleshooting any data related issues around transfer data or otherwise, you can contact me or Jessica at our emails listed below here. And I'll just go back to this QR code in case anybody needs it. But thank you so much, everybody. We have, I don't know if we have any questions, Tori. I was not watching the chat.
It looks like we do not have any questions. I have been putting some of the resources that you mentioned in the chat as well. So there are links that people can click on to get all the information. That's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. That's all we have for you today.
A great one.